For years, the world saw North Korea as a strange, isolated relic, a crumbling house that was odd but not truly feared. It was a poor nation with failing electricity, starving citizens, and a rusty military. The idea that they could build advanced nuclear weapons seemed almost comical. Global powers mocked their threats, laughed at their propaganda, and dismissed their bold claims as just empty noise. Intelligence agencies were convinced the regime lacked the scientists, the money, the technology, and the international connections to pull it off. But what if, behind that curtain of weakness and absurdity, North Korea was playing a much more dangerous game? What if every failed negotiation, every peace talk, and every sudden withdrawal from agreements wasn't incompetence, but a deliberate strategy? A strategy designed to fool the world just long enough for their secret labs, hidden reactors, and black market networks to operate completely undetected. And what if, by the time we realized the truth, North Korea already had what every dictator dreams of and every superpower fears? This isn't just the story of a small country building a bomb. It's the story of how a starving nation outmaneuvered global intelligence, manipulated superpowers, and built one of the world's most dangerous nuclear arsenals right under everyone's noses. To understand how North Korea did this, you have to understand the psychology of a regime that believes survival is everything. From the moment the Korean War ended, the Kim dynasty lived with a single, consuming fear: invasion. Surrounded by enemies, cut off from trade, and crippled by sanctions, North Korea knew it could never compete in terms of economy or conventional military strength. But with nuclear weapons, suddenly a tiny, impoverished country forced the world's most powerful nations to the negotiating table. Suddenly, a dictatorship could guarantee its survival for generations, and so, the nuclear dream began quietly, patiently, and far earlier than most people realize. In the 1980s, North Korean scientists were sent abroad to study nuclear physics, all under the cover of peaceful energy research. The West saw it as harmless. The Soviets saw it as routine. But behind the scenes, the Kim regime was laying the groundwork for a secret nuclear empire. They built research reactors disguised as energy projects, smuggled technology from Pakistan and Eastern Europe, and constructed vast underground facilities that satellites couldn't penetrate. They also mastered the art of diplomatic deception. Every international inspection slowed them down, but never stopped them. Every agreement they signed simply bought them more time. Every shutdown of a facility was just a temporary performance for the cameras. By the time the world finally woke up to what was happening in places like Pyongyang and beyond, it was too late. North Korea had plutonium, enriched uranium, advanced missile technology, and underground testing sites ready to go. This is the unbelievable, almost cinematic story of how one of the poorest nations on Earth built a nuclear arsenal, powerful enough to reshape the global balance of power while the world watched and did nothing. How did North Korea, one of the world's most isolated and impoverished nations, become a nuclear power right under the nose of the entire world? This isn't just a story about a bomb. It's a story of masterful deception, calculated patience, and a geopolitical chess game that left superpowers baffled. And it all begins at a place called Pyongyang. Picture a cluster of aging, nondescript buildings nestled in a forest, shrouded in secrecy. To the outside world, Pyongyang was just a scientific research center, but behind the fences, the Kim regime was quietly, methodically building the heart of its nuclear ambitions. One by one, new structures appeared: a small research reactor, a reprocessing plant, and underground halls carved deep into bedrock, designed to shield sensitive machinery from prying satellite eyes. Every single brick and every piece of steel was part of a grand design with a single, ultimate goal: turning spent nuclear fuel into weapons-grade plutonium. But what truly set North Korea apart wasn't just the construction, it was the genius of its deception. When international inspectors were finally allowed in, they were met with a masterclass in misdirection. Entire laboratories would be sealed off. Walls were freshly painted to hide evidence of past activities, and crucial equipment would simply vanish. North Korean guides, with their answers perfectly rehearsed, led the inspectors down carefully selected hallways. It was like a magician distracting an audience with one hand while hiding the trick with the other. The world was looking, but it wasn't seeing. While diplomats in New York and Geneva debated sanctions and resolutions, North Korea turned to the shadows of the global black market. This was a critical turning point. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the regime established a covert relationship with the infamous Q.Con network. Khan, the Pakistani scientist who had already sold nuclear secrets to Iran and Libya, became North Korea's secret weapon. Through this network, Pyongyang acquired the blueprints for advanced centrifuges, uranium enrichment technology, and the critical components that no sanctioned country should have ever been able to obtain. This wasn't just about buying parts, it was about buying knowledge or shortcut to nuclear capability. At the same time, a silent army of North Korean diplomats stationed abroad became smugglers. They collected industrial parts, illegally acquired precision tools, and used a complex web of front companies to launder money and hide transactions they operated in plain sight, exploiting the loopholes in international trade. Even nations that suspected something was amiss were later shocked to discover the sheer volume of materials that had slipped through their fingers unnoticed. While world leaders were arguing about the next diplomatic move, North Korean engineers were deep underground, silently assembling centrifuges and enriching uranium, turning their newly acquired secrets into tangible progress. Over the years, Pyongyang perfected a strategic playbook that proved almost impossible for the world to counter. It was a brilliant, cynical cycle. Whenever international pressure mounted and sanctions began to bite, North Korea would agree to talks. They would promise peace, pause their missile tests, and even welcome inspectors back to Pyongyang. But they only ever offered just enough transparency to ease the tension, just enough cooperation to get the sanctions loosened or secure a shipment of food aid. The moment the pressure was off, the regime would immediately pivot back into high-speed development mode. The world mistook this cycle for instability or erratic behavior, but it wasn't. It was a deliberate, cold-blooded strategy. Diplomacy wasn't a tool for peace, it was a tool for survival and, more importantly, a tool to buy time. Every negotiation, every agreement, every concession was about gaining another few months, another year for their scientists to perfect warhead casings, refine uranium, and develop missiles that could fly farther and farther with each iteration. By the early 2000s, a frightening reality began to set in. North Korea was becoming self-sufficient. They no longer needed to rely so heavily on foreign help. They had built their own domestic supply chains, trained a new generation of brilliant nuclear physicists, and developed missile engines capable of lifting warheads across continents. The world had tried to isolate them, but instead, they had forced them to become masters of ingenuity. Then came the tests. Each explosion sent a shockwave through the international community. Their first nuclear test in 2006 was widely dismissed by experts as small, weak, maybe even a failure. But that analysis missed the point entirely. Pyongyang wasn't aiming for a perfect, city-destroying blast on its first try. It was demonstrating intent. It was announcing its rival on the nuclear stage. That weak explosion was a promise of what was to come, and what came next was terrifying. Less than a decade later, those small blasts had evolved into powerful detonations estimated to be dozens of times stronger. This chilling progression culminated in the 2017 test, which the regime proudly declared was a hydrogen bomb. Whether it was a true two-stage thermonuclear weapon or not almost didn't matter anymore. The message was loud, clear, and unmistakable. North Korea had crossed the nuclear threshold. It was no longer a wannabe, it was a bona fide nuclear state. Today, the world is a different place because of what happened at Pyongyang, and in those hidden underground labs. The Kim regime possesses a nuclear arsenal that shapes every diplomatic conversation, every military calculation, and every strategic decision in East Asia and beyond. A country once mocked for its poverty and bizarre propaganda now wields weapons capable of devastating entire cities. What began as a desperate, almost paranoid quest for regime survival has transformed into one of the most successful and most dangerous nuclear deception campaigns in modern history. Under sanctions, under constant surveillance, and under immense international pressure, North Korea built the bomb. They didn't do it by racing ahead in a show of force, but by moving slowly and deliberately in the shadows, one careful step at a time, until the world finally realized far too late that they had already won the game. How did North Korea, one of the poorest and most isolated nations on Earth, manage to build nuclear weapons right under the world's nose? The answer isn't just about technology or geopolitics. It's a harsh lesson in how easily global powers can misjudge what they don't truly understand. For decades, world leaders looked at North Korea and saw a backward, starving country, incapable of any real technological achievement. They dismissed Pyongyang's threats as bluster and its ambitions as fantasy, but they completely underestimated the one true advantage the regime had: absolute, impenetrable secrecy. In a country with no independent media, no whistleblowers, and no open borders, the government could operate in complete darkness, far from the prying eyes of the outside world. While international journalists were busy covering the tragic famines, the bizarre propaganda parades, and the strange speeches coming from the capital, a massive and complex nuclear machine was quietly taking shape. Deep underground, this project was fueled by fear, extreme discipline, and a single-minded, relentless drive for survival. Every diplomatic maneuver, every stalled negotiation, every sudden walkout from international talks, it was all part of a carefully calculated strategy. North Korea was playing the long game, buying time. Pyongyang understood something the world was far too slow to grasp. Nuclear weapons weren't just tools of war, they were instruments of survival, leverage, and even respect on the world stage. Once they crossed that nuclear threshold, the old threats of regime change, invasion, or economic collapse would lose their power. The nukes would become a shield, a guarantee that the regime would endure. Today, North Korea is a living paradox, a nation where people starve, yet one that can produce weapons powerful enough to shake global markets and challenge superpowers. Its nuclear arsenal has transformed it from a forgotten backwater into a permanent fixture of international diplomacy. World leaders can no longer afford to treat Pyongyang as a joke. They are forced to treat it as a nuclear peer. This leaves the world trapped between two grim realities. The first is the humanitarian truth. Millions of North Koreans continue to suffer under one of the most oppressive regimes in modern history. The second is the geopolitical truth. That same regime now possesses enough nuclear material to devastate cities across Asia and maybe even further. So the world treads carefully, caught in a delicate balance where any missile test, any aggressive speech, could trigger a catastrophic escalation. What started as a hidden program in a remote, mountainous region has now become one of the greatest destabilizing forces of the 21st century. But perhaps the most unsettling part of this story isn't that North Korea built the bomb. It's that they succeeded because the world was so certain they couldn't. It was the arrogance and false confidence of powerful nations, assuming that poverty always equals weakness. The story of North Korea's nuclear rise reveals an uncomfortable truth. Desperation can be a more powerful motivator than money, and secrecy can be a more effective tool than advanced technology. As long as the regime believes its very survival depends on these weapons, it will never give them up, regardless of sanctions, negotiations, or threats. And so, we must live with a reality. That one seemed impossible. The most secretive, isolated, and unpredictable dictatorship on Earth is now a permanent nuclear power. The story of how it got there is a chilling warning to us all, a reminder that, even in the darkest shadows, history can be forged without anyone noticing until it's already too late. Thanks for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into the events that shape our world.